the national, the national show.
Sorry, it just said it's recording.
The national show is the only indicator of excellence, basically. So if you enter one of our national shows and get 1 to 3 paintings in, you get 3 points. And so even one painting gives you 3 points. In order to attain that signature status, you need 12 points. So it's a minimum of 4 years of getting into the national show and being a member at the same time. But if you get any awards, sometimes that will also accrue points for you too. So if you get a first place award, you get like 5 points. So that brings you in a lot quicker and a lot closer. Even a sponsorship award, the sponsorship awards are basically merchandise awards that are different companies give, and you'll see the purple ribbons on the wall. Those are the sponsorship awards after tomorrow. And those are, you get 1 point for even that. So, but you know, attaining the 12 points and becoming a signature member is like a real status thing. And becoming a signature member means that when you sign your name on the painting, you can put PSN underneath it. Okay, that's what your signature status means. Very few people actually put the PSN there. The watercolor society in Albuquerque does seem to do put theirs, take that seriously. But we just, once you get a certificate, that's what we'll be giving out on Saturday. We've got a new signature member coming in. Laverne Bolton will become a signature member this year. And she gets a really nice certificate that tells you that you've attained that level. So it's just, yeah, it's you know, it's a, and then we also have another thing called Distinguished Pastelist. And the Distinguished Pastelist is, okay, you've achieved signature status. Now you volunteer for the society. You have possibly an article in an art magazine of your artwork. There are different other things that you can do to obtain signature status. Sarah Blumenschein, the lady that does all those filling, she's a distinguished pastelist because she's all over. So yeah, so just so you know what that signature show was, we don't even jury that one because we assume that all our signature members can at least do pretty nice paintings to send in. So it worked out well. So, and we ended up selling 10 paintings. It was wonderful, really good. So yeah, happy with the signature show. Hopefully the Enchanted Colors show you will too. Wanted to introduce you to the society. The Pastel Society of New Mexico was one of the early societies of the Renaissance, basically the Renaissance of pastel. Pastel had kind of waned in the 20th century. Pastels and oils have always kind of competed with each other, and oil is easier to show it, and you know, some galleries like pastel, even though they're not that delicate, you know. But so early in 1972, the Pastel Society of America was founded in New York City, and that was like the real early bringing back of the pastels. And we were formed in 1989 by a group of 12 pastelists in Albuquerque that thought that it would be nice to bring out the pastel. And our credo is to advance pastel as an art form, as a medium, and to assist in many art venues and things going on in the New Mexico area, you know, to be part of this. And it's a really nice art community, actually, starting at Taos and then getting down to Santa Fe and Albuquerque. So it's great. So well, we're proud to have been kind of a spearhead on that. Now there are pastel societies literally covering the world. I mean, China, Russia, all of Europe. And we have the thing called it's an organization called the International Society of Pastel, International Association of Pastel Society, IAP. And we're fortunate that have their convention every 2 years in Albuquerque, and people come from all over the world to it. So we're the Pastel Society of New Mexico is kind of their liaison. We help them out, help them organize everything, and we're all a part of it. We're a good part of it, actually. So, yeah, we're proud of what we can do with them, and we hope they keep coming to New Mexico because it's been a lot of fun. So, the jurors, when we have the jurors take on the task of jurying like this Enchanted Colors show, we try to pick 3 jurors that are different in their range. So we usually try to get a landscape artist and maybe a portrait or figurative artist, and then maybe a still life artist, just so we have a good, well-rounded jury. The way they jury our show is people enter their paintings, and then each of the jurors take a look at each of the paintings and judge them by artistic merit on a score of 1 to 10. Okay, so when we get our scores back, we've got this whole range of scores that, like say, the best score one painting could get is a 30 because it's got 10 from each of the 3 jurors. The worst score would be a 3. We've never got a 3. we've had a few came close to sadly, but once we do that, like when we were trying to pick out the paintings for the museum, we actually could start at the very top, and like Sarah Blumenschein is usually right at the very top, and count down the number of paintings we want to have in the museum down to a certain threshold. So like say you have a 17, which would be a 5 and a 5 and a 7, you know, so there are different combinations of 17, but when we get to a certain number and we're in that threshold, we usually try to take all the ones in threshold. That's why we ended up with a few more paintings than we wanted this year. We ended up with 73 paintings, but fortunately we're able to fit them in on the wall. But that's how we judge it. And then I also have this virtual show. The virtual show, we add digital paintings, and like people from China actually entering, they're not going to ship a painting because it's really expensive, if even possible. So they entered the virtual show. So we have a total of 124, including the ones here that will be in the virtual show, that you'll be able to go online and you can actually look at all the paintings in this show, plus those digital ones. So it worked out really nicely. What my original plan was to actually, like in past years, we had so many digital paintings that we could sing loud, a lot of them. And I thought this year it would be the same thing, but it turned out that since we were only judging paintings that were going to be physically here instead of all the paintings, we didn't get a lot of digital entries. We got a lot, but not enough to actually, if I wanted to take all the digital entries that came in, I'd be going down to some of those that rated as 3. But so what we did was we ended up having to make a special category for some of the people that were planning on carrying the paintings in or shipping, but didn't score high enough to get in the museum show. So we made a special category where we could put those into the digital show, and it worked out pretty nicely too. So once we post that link, you'll be able to go in and look at all of these paintings. It's kind of a cool. I don't know if you've done our past virtual shows, but you can actually travel through the museum as though you're actually walking through and looking at the painting. There are other ways to look at it too, which sometimes a little less cumbersome, but it works out pretty nicely. So I'm glad we do the virtual show, because I have friends in Europe that say, "Oh, I saw your show, it's great." Whereas if it's just a physical show, people can't come unless they're actually in town. So it works out great. So, and then wanted to go through the name change. We've been the Pastel Society of New Mexico National Pastel Painting Exhibition forever. It started out as the annual, then we skipped a year, so we had to drop the year. And so it's been that, and at first I was a little resistant to change, but then we thought, it's our 31st show. Why don't we give it kind of a new flavor, a new face? So we came up with the name Enchanted Colors because we wanted to kind of give it the flavor of New Mexico and, give it kind of a sort of magical feeling. And I'm really happy we did because but then I was telling someone the other day, I said, well, it's going to be the Enchanted Colors show. I said, well, how will the people know if it's pastel? I said, well, it's the pastel side of New Mexico, the Enchanted Colors show. So, thanks. Yeah. But yeah, and it just seems to have sort of, we needed a little bit of a facelift, and it's kind of fun. So, or not so stodgy. I mean, I have felt that sometimes we are kind of a stodgy organization. We kind of steep ourselves in tradition, and that's the way we've always done it. We change, so it's been kind of nice to have just a little fancy name change, and the way Marilyn Drake, our graphics director, found that particular type style that we have to have Enchanted Colors done. It's called calligraphy, and it just being perfect for the whole thing. So it's going to be fun to see how people react to it and everything that goes on now. So we'll find out. Okay, I think that's all I'm going to talk about.
Okay, let's see if I can navigate this.
Could I ask one question?
Perfect.
Nicholas, so the show that is being hung now, the paintings here are all from your New Mexico chapter, right?
They are not.
They're not, okay.
Every and anywhere. We have California, people in California, Illinois. I'm not sure the government, but South. I'm not sure which ones are in the actual physical show, but yeah, we've had people shipping from different places, Wisconsin. So
this is a national show
national.
put on by the local.
That is correct.
Okay.
It's always been national, and we have gone international. We have gone international physically. Sometimes we've had people senators from Canada, from Germany, from Spain. But not this time.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I had it all set up. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I shouldn't-
Go ahead, ask another question.
Magic.
Yeah, I have a clip. I will do that in just a second. There we go.
The portraits that I'm going to show early on in the presentation are from a exhibition that was shown a few years ago at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They're from the 18th century, and as you can kind of tell from this, they're as fresh looking as they were when they were painted years ago. So with oil paints, the cracking, darkening, several things happen. With pastels, as long as they're preserved, last and last. Now, what made the show really interesting was it discussed the hardships that went on during the 18th century. Today, if we want to buy a set of pastels, they're numbered, they're somehow graded so that you know what pastels you have when you use them. Or another one looks exactly like that. In the 18th century, the pastels were made in their own little ateliers. They would take the pigments and bind them and make them six, and never really had the same colors a second time, which isn't always bad, but it's nice to have the confidence in the colors again. Prior to 1780, pastels were mass produced. The Giraud company, which is still in full force today, was one of the first pastel companies to mass produce pastels. They do beautiful pastel colors, and they have a whole large grading of pastels. And again, you know, I just had to do things that they're only telling you. And around the same time, glass formation changed. The French Royal Glass Works came up with finally being able to pour a 60 by 40 inch pane of glass, which prior to that time, it was 29 by 17, which is relatively small. And when you really stop to consider that was like the last innovation in plate glass for artists until just a decade ago. Of course, there are larger size glass that are made now, tempered glass, whatever, store windows that go to infinity. But it wasn't until a few decades ago that we came up with what's known as anti-reflective or museum glass. And that is what made it so you no longer saw your reflection in the glass of the painting, which is made. Pastels and oil painters have always been kind of a competition. Both are opaque media, and with oil painting and pastel, you use basically the same technique in art. But when you have glass that doesn't reflect, and then people aren't framing with the framing with the edge, you can't tell the difference sometimes between the oil and the pastels. It's great. These are some paintings that were done at that time, and this one it was actually 19 3/8 by 39 3/8 by 31 and a half. So this is one of the larger ones once the glass became large. And he put down 4 pieces of blue laid paper that was laid on canvas, and gorgeous work. Next, you can see the detail that he used in the lace and in the jewelry and everything. That's pastel. Yeah, done there. Next slide, the buttons, the frill of the shirt. Just you know, a lot of times people don't think you can do fine detailed work with pastel, but it's amazing what you can do. Next, please.
That's where I was gonna stop it, Nicholas.
Okay.
So let's get the light, and then we're gonna make a quick change.
Wanted to expand a little bit on what I was saying there, that in last year's show, somebody came up to me after looking through a thing, and she said, well, why do some of the paintings have glass and some of them don't? And I said, they all have glass. It's just the anti-reflective glass really doesn't look like glass. So it's pretty amazing when you, it really was an innovation that was like earth shaking for the pastel medium, because you can actually not see the reflection in it. I mean, the light behind it, but if you're standing and you don't have a light behind you, you can't see the reflection. You actually see the artwork as it's meant to be seen. So it's wonderful.
Can I ask you a question? To get that detailed work, are you using a large pastel piece, or are you using a tiny pencil, or?
It varies. Brian Cobble, who's a absolutely fantastic realistic artist, like he does these scenes that look like European plazas and everything, and totally detailed. And I asked him if he used pastel pencils, or he said no, he actually sharpens his pastels. Actually, you know, he said, I don't know. He said, I don't know if it's healthy to do that, but yeah. Now there are times like I did the Ukrainian Easter eggs last year in my still life, and I did that almost exclusively, the eggs themselves in pastel, and it worked out well. that I've done, one other scene, another painting I did of the Route 66 diner in Albuquerque on Central, which is kind of the old style with neon. So I tried doing the neon. It didn't upload. I had to basically it was just making sure that you break the pastel so you have a really good edge. And that works out really well. So that, yeah, but I couldn't get the brightness I needed. Worked out. Great. Cool.
Is it on your screen?
It's like I wanted to screen.
There you go.
There we go.
It's off.
Kind of taking on where we left off here, but let's go on because we need to get to pigments. Okay. First, before we talk about the pigments through history, and pigments have had interesting history is they've exhumed, and I may have mentioned it last time, they've exhumed skeletons of Renaissance artists and found high lead contents in the bones, you know. So, I mean, it's pretty hard to work with these toxic chemicals and not absorb some. And pastel is actually worse because at least when you got a brush, you're a little bit distant from the, you might be working on mixing the things, but I thought talk about toxins throughout history. Many of the early, well, basically, we didn't really know that lead was really that harmful to us way back when. In fact, Grecian formula hair color early on was made with lead.
That explains so much.
And in my early days of working with pastels, I started basically, I completely changed over from oils to pastel probably in the 80s. And my Rembrandt set had plenty of cadmium, wonderfully bright colors, cadmium orange, cadmium red, cadmium yellows, but they were all toxic, you know. And again, you know, you're breathing these dusts. But then I got to thinking about cigarette smoking. I mean, back in the early days, I mean, there are ads from the 1900s that showed to calm a baby down, blow cigarette smoke in his face. And there was also some kind of a bellows that they had for smoke in other places. You know, why would you do that? You know, so then in you know, smoking was romantic. It was like all the actors and everything like that. But I remember my dad, who was a smoker all his life till probably 10 years before he passed, he finally decided to quit. And it's a hard habit to quit. In the 50s, sometimes he would show a demonstration and take a puff of a cigarette and take a napkin and blow through it. And there was a brown stain. I mean, from one puff of a cigarette. And he said, when you look at that, you know this isn't good for you. And I mean, why did it take everybody so long to find out that it was horrible for you? But so many things like that, and we seem to go through the centuries like that. So I wanted to do that before we talk about the history of some pigments. And Michael Chesley Johnson, who's a really wonderful landscape artist, he did some articles in Pastel Journal. So I borrowed some of this from. He gave me these to use, but it's some interesting stuff. I hope you enjoy. Start with red. Historically found in earth as rust, iron oxide, and rust itself isn't harmful to you. But many poisonous versions have been used, including red lead and cinnabar, which contains mercury. It's just, again, people found something that was a great color for them and didn't really question whether it was toxic. Since the late 1800s, a variety of organic pigments, organic meaning they contain carbon, have been created, and modern pigments such as naphthol, red, quinacridone red, and pyrrole red give us some of our most intense light fast colors now. So that's reds. It seems like we've been able to phase ourselves, and pretty much all of the pastel companies now have no toxins in the pastels. They've actually eliminated and found substitutes, and thank goodness for the pastel artists.
Was the plant added to the pigment, or was it actually occurring as part of it? Was the lead added to the pigment, or was it actually part of
The
it?
lead was part of what made the pigment color.
Okay.
Yeah. Lead white, I believe when I first was working in oil paint, lead white was still. So, we're going to yellow now. Before the industrial age, mine commercial, yellow ochre is the safest pigment. We found a safe one. But yellow ochre is more of the earth type yellow. It's not a bright yellow. Naples yellow contains poisonous lead, was used by Babylonian ceramics. Chrome yellow, also toxic, was used by the Impressionists. So, in the 20th century, Hansa yellow has been replacing the toxic cadmium. Thank goodness.
And this is just for pastel, correct?
Pardon me?
This is just for pastel.
I think pretty much across the board.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can still buy that in red with oil. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Okay.
That's yeah. Okay. Green. In the funereal adornment, the ancient Egyptians used malachite, a rich mineral green procured from mines across the Red Sea and Sinai Peninsula. Romans made more intense green, very green, by soaking copper plates in fermenting wine. That does not do safe either, does it? And sap green, made from buckthorn berries, was used in the Renaissance period to color clothing for merchants and bankers. Clothing color denoted social class or profession, which I didn't know that. And although green has been a commonly used color throughout the ages, most of these early pigments provided either dull, toxic, or prone to fading discoloration. Because of the fickle nature of green, Renaissance painters preferred to create greens by glazing yellow over blue, which there again in oil paintings, people know about glazing. And basically in pastel, you're kind of doing the same thing, but you're actually laying down one color and then a thin transparent coating of the other. And in fact, I read that during the time that Michelangelo was painting the Sistine Chapel, he had to be very careful. There were some blue skies that they were, some colors they were using blue skies that would fade to green. So I mean, what a feat he did to do that, but he didn't want to have anything eventually destroy his works. And, preferring to create greens by glazing yellow and blue, malachite alone provided a rich light pass color, but the color of mineral varied and would change in the presence of acids, which may have been what he was experiencing there, just due to the atmosphere of what was going on in the Sistine Chapel there. Okay, blue. Blue's an interesting one. Natural blues in the form of crushed azurite and lapis lazuli have been used for thousands of years. Expensive though. We'll talk about that. Later blues were created by heating copper and sand together to make a glass that was then ground to a powdered pigment. And I want to read this before I go on to the next thing. It said none of the later blues compared to the richness of lapis lazuli and the pigment that was derived from it, ultramarine blue. The highest quality of this mineral was and still is mined in the tiny region of Afghanistan. During the Renaissance, lapis lazuli was so expensive that an artist needed a wealthy patron to purchase it, and it was reserved only for the most important sections of the painting, such as the Virgin Mary's robe and religious images. The term ultramarine means from beyond the sea. I never knew that actually. And indeed, the pigment arrived in Italy from across the Mediterranean Sea after a long and dangerous haul along spice routes by merchant caravans. Kind of an interesting feature I had never heard of, but it's great. In the modern era, blues have been synthesized in the laboratory, and they're gorgeous blues now. They are non-toxic and really an asset to the pastel stand photo painters too. Violet. Ochres, which are a mixture of clay and sand, granting any of several hues, even a very dull violet, very dull. Accent on that. Caput mortuum, Latin for deadhead. Is a purplish brown oxide found in hematite and was once used in paintings of religious figures and patrons. Cobalt violet, also toxic, was made in a laboratory. Of course, cobalts have been used in ceramics a lot for many years. Made in a laboratory. Today, these historic pigments are supplemented by modern ores by a full range of beautiful violets. And I thought this was interesting. During Roman times, a tiny mollusk, the murex, was harvested and processed to create Tyrian purple, an intense but fugitive, not light fast, color. It was used primarily to dye the robes of emperors. It took more than 250,000 of these little creatures to make a half ounce of dye, which was only enough to stain a single robe. It's still the most expensive dye in the world at about $120,000 per ounce. Who would buy that?
It's called generally in blue.
That's fine.
Yeah.
It's it was called the Tyrian function. Okay, and we'll go on a little bit. I talked a little bit about mass production, but I have a little bit more on that. The Giraud company, which I mentioned, was founded in 1780 and was basically the first company to mass produce pastels. And again, by mass producing it, you no longer had the artists doing just taking the pigments in their atelier and never getting a standard color. These were basically standardizing colors. And it was founded as a cottage industry, and since 1780, Giraud craftsmen have been handing down their skills in manufacturing single product, pastel only. The company was originally known as Quentin de la Tour in the USA, and back under the original name Giraud Pastels, but without sleeves. Now the Giraud pastels are as thick as some of the other companies' pastels, but they don't have a paper sleeve on them. They have the knuckle free in them in the stick itself. So you have to be careful and mark down what the stick is when you pre-order it. And this is the early days of the Giraud company, the family of the Girouds. And then Sennelier, they came about a century later, a very good company. They were oil paints, and pastels alike. And this is an early cylinder porcelain pigment grinding machine that the Sennelier store in Paris in 1900. And they grind the pastels. Nowadays, they actually, like the Terry Ludwig company, they have like large KitchenAid mixer type of things, you know, like you use for dough in a bakery, and they mix the dyes, their pigment separately. And I think we've discussed the medium being just enough binder to hold it together. I wanted to go into This is something I put out in the last demonstration. There's a relatively new company called the Pan Pastel. And some people hate them, some people love them. But the way it works is more, and this looks more like the pigments that instead of stick, comes in, looks like a makeup compact. And in a variety of different colors. And use tools like this, little sponge tools to do your work. Again, getting detail with that, you need extra things beside that. But we have an artist, Enid Wood, that she loves Pan Pastels. She's one of their spokespeople. But yeah, it was just kind of to point out that there are different forms now of pastel besides pastel sticks, pastel pencils, hard pastels like the new pastel. And, yeah, we can talk about the painting surface too. This is a close-up view of a Sennelier Lacarte paper. It is called pastel card. And it's what I use exclusively. It's basically a vegetable fiber. And you, I wish I would have brought samples with me, but if you kind of touch it, it's not like sandpaper, it's not real rough. It's got a fine surface and it feels really nice. But when you look at it under that, it's like freaky, you know. And so, actually, some people a friend of mine in Albuquerque said that he had laid a bare piece of Sennelier in the cart on his table, or on, maybe he was standing on the floor or something. And we get a lot of cockroaches that go up and it was eating tabs and Sennelier. He said once the pastel was on it, they didn't eat it anymore. But yeah, it's pretty scary.
I can attest to that too.
Oh, really?
Yes, that's a phenomenon in Albuquerque.
I know.
Downtown,
It's
especially.
really sad.
Yeah,
I mean, because people are fleeing, you know, it's just.
yeah,
From up through the sewer. My father-in-law, I mean, my ex-wife's dad and mom, I mean, I think my mother-in-law would clean the tops of the surface of the door frames, you know, they're so clean, but they still get cockroaches.
Yeah.
Yikes. And this is a color fix paper. It's from Australia. It looks more like what you'd expect a sanded paper to look like in close-up view. And then this is UR paper. A lot of people love UR. And it's more of a coarse looking, almost looks like broken glass, you know. But this, there are different, actually, if you look at the back of UR paper, it almost looks like the back of sandpaper. It's got like 500 grit or grit. And you can get in several different grits to find what you're happy with. I like the finest grit, but you know, some people like the coarse grit where it actually shows through the pastel what the paint too. So, but yeah, that's UR close up.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the name of the second one that was before you are?
But there's,
Oh, thank you.
and then, well, I think we talked about money with different, I had to actually work on a few pastels out there that, one of them, just the shaking the ship, and it got some pastel that I was done so I had to put them on part. I don't like that because, you know, you're opening yourself up to it. Even though, like when I frame my paintings, I use just a spacer around the painting itself, and it's less likely to be able to drop. But I try to make sure that I really beat all the color off there, the excess color before you frame it to make sure. But that's the style that I use, the backing of foam core, and then it's this little sticky 1/8" spacer that you put around the bottom of the glass, and then you lay the glass on top of the painting, and then I can take actually 1" Scotch tape around the whole edge of it to hermetically seal everything into the glass structure, which is really kind of nice because a lot of times yeah, a whole closet full of paintings that didn't sell, you know. So it's like, okay, I got this one, except that it shows the same size frame as that one. All I have to do is take off the back of the sheet and take off the little brads that will all in there. And take the whole sandwich of the painting glass thing out, take it right out and put your other one right into that same frame. And then put the brads around it. It's great. It works out nicely because then you've got, I have a stack of non-frame ones. They're just waiting to go in another frame. But painting that I had here 2 years ago, the deity in the light, I entered it in the masterwork show and it sold this year. So it's like, you never know. If the right person just comes along.
Yeah.
Kind of like the one that I sold in the, and I'm not bragging, I hardly ever sell anything, so it's really wanted to sell too. The one that I sold in the signature show was the one that's been in like 5 or 6 different shows that somebody just happened to come up. Like, you know, you never know. This is how some people frame their painting. Did you get the
I did, thank you.
Okay, this is how some people, and it's definitely not recommended, but the people that do it will not change. The, instead of having that spacer in between the picture and the glass, they mount it right up against the glass. If you take a look at Sarah Blumenstein's, that's the way she does it. And Miss Catherine Irish, both great artists, sell lots of paintings. That's the way they do it. But the people that don't like this say that if you go into a humid climate and that humidity kind of gets into there, it can cause damage. They have not had any problem with it, but you know, there are definitely 2 schools of thought on it. But I like the spacers.
So the glass is, example, just mounted right on top.
Right on top of the painting, yeah.
And putting it on, it doesn't smear, I mean, it's been fixated or fixed or whatever you call it.
Well, most of us don't.
No, so you don't fix.
The reason you don't, it darkens the pencil.
Okay.
And you really don't want to do that. It also, there's a crystalline structure of the pastel that, if you look at the pastel under a microscope, you can actually see it sort of prisms. You know, micro, which is actually giving sort of an iridescent feel. When you spray it or fix it, sometimes it happens that. So, some people will do a fixative and then paint on top of it, fix it to give it a little bit of a rough texture so they can have more surface to paint on. But for the most part, don't fix. But yeah, they say that they don't even have any trouble with something falling because it's not in spacer there, you know. So glad you were not in. But again, the schools of thought on that are really polarized. So, and last we talked a little bit about the different the breakthrough, and then I wanted to these are some we went through many of these before, but I've got a few new artists that I want to point out too. I mean, these are great words. So, and this show was actually in the Metropolitan Museum of Art about maybe 5 or 7 years ago. And the paintings are from the 18th century and they look as fresh as they were painted today. You know, I mean, as long as you take care of them, you know, you don't want to have like sunlight shining on them or to fade the color. They'll last. I mean, whereas oil paintings will varnish or eventually darken a little bit. They'll crack. You know, you see many Renaissance paintings with cracks all over them, but it's just the nature of the beast. So you don't have that problem with pastels, but yes, they are a little bit more fragile to shape. But there again, this is my 10th year of running the national show. Enchanted Colors. and we probably have an average of 35 to 45 paintings shipped to the show every year. And in all the times I've been doing it, I'd say I probably had like 10 paintings that had minor damage, and some of them, they use a lousy frame and it split apart, or sometimes where the bevel goes down instead of up, and they put it in the crate with foam, and that under bevel went right behind the foam and hit the edge and caused. But I probably only had glass break 3 times. And even when the glass broke, it didn't damage the painting. Now, that's not to say it never happens, but in my experience of doing this, it's been really good. So
The kids would not have had glass, or were they small enough to have had glass?
they're generally smaller portraits. There are a few larger ones, but they did have glass.
So Nicholas, that's just to connect with what Joanne is saying. That's what you were referencing at the beginning of the slide, or before we started the slideshow, that the evolution, so to speak, of pastels kind of occurred in parallel with the evolution of glass, and that when they started having the technology to make larger glass, the paintings would get bigger
And that made us be able to compete.
with oil.
With oils, and the fact that portraits and figurative work in pastel is really kind of a nice, it's a good way to do pastel, because you don't have to wait for the oil paint to dry in a certain section and bring the model back 3 or 4 times or whatever. So yeah, that's why a lot of portrait artists do street art. They'll do portraits on the street with pastel. And I remember there was a gentleman. This was back in the '60s. My cousin and I used to go to the mall, and there was an artist that would paint portraits right there, and he did stunning work, And I remember there were a few times, several times actually, that when he got it done, it was a spitting image of the person he was painting, and he showed it to me. That's not me. There's one of them. And we looked at but people don't know what they themselves. So, yeah, I mean, when you see yourself in the mirror, it's not the same as,
Right,
what people are seeing. But I mean, the guy was so good. I mean, they would buy the thing, you wouldn't sell it for that expensive, but I mean, okay, the enthusiasm waned in the latter part, at the turn of the 19th century. But then here's some pastel artists from the 1900s, or mid 1800s into the 1900s, I believe, and that includes the Impressionists too. Like we're going to Degas. So, but Jean-Francois Millet, he was an artist, and he had basically, I think I should have taught. Millet was a child of members of the farming community in the village Gruchy, Normandy, close to the coast. Under guidance of 2 priests, he acquired knowledge of Latin and modern authors. Being the eldest son, he soon had to help his father with the farming. But in 1833, his father sent him to study with a portrait painter named Mon du Mochel. Later in his life, he was commissioned by a patron, Emile Gallet, to paint a collection of pastels that eventually included 90 works. And I thought his pastel paintings are rather charming. So I just thought I'd share them with you. Kind of slice of life.
Mhm.
So the kids are watching, huh?
Super.
Just a quaint version of living at the time. everything on. When you think of pastels in the Impressionist era, this B1. So I don't know if we had these last time. I did this for you, but his balance of warm and cool colors and the composition pretty much great in every one of his paintings. And I thought I'd show a few of his discrete paintings. But again, the balance of color, the balance of composition are great. And now, of course, I'm completely different asthma. Okay? And this is Frank Ray. He was the painter to the Longhorns. He was an inventor. He actually created his own pastel sets. And he invented that little easel that he's using out on the field. And he would take groups of young ladies on these expeditions to paint. Yeah, I know. If you said that nowadays, you'd say, this guy's, what is he? But apparently it was all on him. No, and a lot of young ladies learned pastel painting and field painting, plein air painting from him. So it worked out real well. And I just think he was actually born, I believe, in Illinois, but he moved to Texas. And all of the paintings that you'll see here are pastel paintings that he did on the range of Texas. Just wonderful work. That's one of my favorites of his. Just being so good. But yeah, with longhorns and cattle and cowboys and. Doing a scene like that, there's a lot of detail there.
How big is that original?
Pardon?
How big is that original?
I don't remember. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I'm sure it can't be too small. And I think we talked about preservation. We've gone through some of that work. Yeah, you don't want to have too much light on a painting. So basically, 1 foot candle is the amount of light that is reflected off the wall, and 1 lumen. And if you have like yard lights, sometimes you buy 1 lumen light. That's not very bright. And so the lumen is a better designation of brightness than wattage ever was with bulbs, because a 60-watt bulb means how much heat is dissipated from it, whereas a 60-watt LED light is 815 lumens. So 815 lumens tells you about what the actual light output is. So.
And I'll just add to that, just
Sure.
because these are docents, but that's common terminology in the way we look at museum lighting also, and artifacts that are out, and how long they can be out, like how many hours of foot candles that they have.
Sure.
So that's all interconnected. It's not
Right.
just pastels. Yeah.
Just to predict like sunlight and bright light can
Yeah.
affect things over the ages.
Yeah.
Are these new LED light bulbs you buy for your house bad for your paintings?
Are they what for your paintings?
Bad for
No,
your
no.
I think they're better, actually.
It's just, there's you never want to have, like, say, a floodlight on a painting for like a year, because that will cause it to fade. But, and in fact, like in the shows that we have at the Expo in Mexico in Albuquerque, there's some sunlight that actually comes through, so the skylight is there. And you don't want the paintings in that sunlight area, it's only there for a certain period as the sun goes over that, but still it's pretty bright light in there. So when we used to have the national show at that Hispanic Arts Center, we would actually go up on the roof, and we didn't even have we didn't ask permission. we went on the roof and put paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I never liked the fact of having sunlight on pastel. Well, they didn't have one on pastel show, so yeah, I didn't like that. Okay, so as you say, you put candles in. And for longer periods of time, the light level of 3-foot candles should be maintained. But again, I think nowadays the pigments that are used have a better light fastness. They actually create them, so they're not quite as sensitive as they probably were in the 18th century. But still, it is kind of like plastics on the outside. Plastics on the outside. The ultraviolet rays of the sun just kill plastics. It's like, I don't know why they make certain parts of cars out of plastic, because it's like it's going to break it. So, but again, you have to use discretion in anything to make sure that it's not abused. And 20th century today, as I taught pastel society, America was founded in 1972. Again, I may be repeating a lot of this stuff, but I don't think I have the paintings. We were in the 1989, and our first shows were in the American Furniture place. And these are some paintings from actually last year. So, the artists there, you'll see them in this show too. Paul Murray's not, he didn't enter anything this year, sadly, because he's a great artist. Another one we're painting, John Spain, he's got some paintings here. And then I wanted to show this was the Ukrainian Easter I did with pastel pencil. And it was really funny because, we say it had, every painting has to be 80% soft pastel. And so when somebody took a look at this painting in mine, she said, "Well, how did you do that? Did you use pastel pencil for that?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "I thought it had to be soft pastel." Well, pastel pencils are soft pastel. She said, "Well, what's not soft pastel?" Oil pastel. That's the only thing that's not soft pastel. So that's the reason I wanted to show that. It was kind of like the new pastel they had. They're very hard, but they're considered soft pastel. But the difference with soft pastel is, as I said, it's pigment with just enough binder to make it hold together. Oil pastels, there's like a waxy substance in it, and that's what we don't want. You like just that you're painting with pure pigment, and it works out with any.
Didn't you say last year oil pastel is just like oil painting?
Basically,
So it's not really pastel.
right.
It's more like oil painting.
Yeah, at least we consider it that way. As far as pastel societies go, it's just not part of the pastel medium that we consider. So thank you very much. Here to answer.
Yeah.
Is oil pastel put on the brush?
Pardon me?
Is oil pastel